Hello and welcome back to the Wishing You Well podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Amy L. Barrow, founder of Revive Center for Wellness.
And I'm Catherine Van Eyck. We're both licensed therapists and wellness enthusiasts.
We know how overwhelming it can be to figure out how to navigate your wellness journey.
So each episode, we hope to bring all the pieces together to help you figure out what fits best for you. This week on Wishing You Well, we are discussing compassion fatigue. We'll break down this common phenomenon and discuss why it happens, who it happens to, how to prevent it, and recover from it. But first, we have some announcements.
Yes, I wanted to share a little bit about groups. Catherine and I have been sharing some updates about all of our groups programming the last couple of months. And so we wanted to let you know why we love groups. First, if you're thinking about therapy, then groups are a really great way to ease your way into that process and often can be more affordable. But if you are already in therapy, groups are a nice complement to the work that you're doing with your therapist because it can be a little bit more focused and more discussion based than a therapy session.
Yeah, we do love groups here at Revive, and our team of amazing therapists facilitate these groups both in person and virtually throughout the year. So far this year, we've had a stress reduction group for college students, an open group for moms, and there's so much more to come. Stay tuned for more information about our upcoming groups, like the one for senior citizens and another for empty nesters. So we'll definitely have more details on that, on both of those groups as soon as possible.
Speaking of things that we love, Catherine and I have been loving sharing our therapist reactions, our therapist perspectives on our Reactivity TV, which you can find on our YouTube channel. And you're going to want to check it out because odds are whatever trending show is out, we are watching it. We are all over it with our therapist perspective. So in case you don't know what Reactivity TV is, every week, Catherine and I commentate on shows like The Bachelorette, which is coming soon. And we recently wrapped Succession season 4 and had a lot to say about that final season. But really any show that is out there right now that is trending, that is like that you are watching on your screen, we are talking about. But there's so much to watch and we're always looking for more suggestions on what show we should cover next. So be sure to email us at wishingyouvell@revivecfw.com to let us know what show you want us to give our therapist reactions to.
And just in general, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for listening, following, rating, and reviewing. And for those of you who have done those reviews, we really appreciate it. Thank you for rating us. We love it. We really appreciate your feedback and truly love having the opportunity to provide all this information to our listeners. So please continue giving us those ratings and reviews. It really helps us.
Okay, let's get into our episode. Living a full and well life is put together. Authentic.
We feel it.
Take care of ourselves. So, as Catherine said at the top of our episode, we are talking about compassion fatigue today, which feels kind of timely. I mean, maybe for me, it feels like a good time to be talking about compassion fatigue. But, you know, we wanted to cover it because it is something that so many people experience. They might not even realize or be able to like understand that there's a name to put what like symptoms that they're experiencing. So we wanted to talk about it because it is so common, it is so widespread. And we also wanted to help our listeners figure out ways to kind of manage it, maybe recover from it. So yeah, I'm glad that we're talking about this today.
Yeah, me too. And I think we can start with generally what compassion really is. You know, we can't get to fatigue from compassion without giving a little compassion, feeling a little compassionate. So how would you define compassion?
I guess my thought around what compassion is really just like the act of caring for others or just like simply caring for others. Just, yeah, I think simply put, that's how I view compassion. What about you?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I usually equate compassion and empathy together. And just because we're doing this podcast, I was like, let me look up the formal definition of compassion. And talked about sympathy and pity, which I thought was really interesting. And I feel like when we're talking about compassion fatigue, we're talking, I mean, it also, let me also add that it did also talk about needing to care or spare somebody from feeling hurt. So I think that it's kind of like the two together. So I feel like we're really talking about that second part, and like that empathy is like so draining. So I think like compassion fatigue is really like empathy fatigue.
Yeah, well, it's so funny that you say that, because just, scrolling away on Instagram today, I follow Kristen Neff, who is a really brilliant researcher all about self-compassion. And so she's a great follow if you don't follow her already. But she actually has an upcoming workshop around compassion fatigue. And in that workshop description, she kind of talks about that there is a difference between empathy and compassion. And therefore, there's a difference between empathy fatigue and compassion fatigue, which
wow.
I know. And so it might be interesting. Maybe it's like a turning of the times, where maybe compassion fatigue will be differently coined, because to your point, I think what makes, for me personally, for many of us in kind of a helping field, it's not only the act of caring or being a caregiver for, it's the empathy piece that can be really draining, of really, really trying to just be mindful of others and their experiences and taking that into account all day long. Which, as I say that, I don't know, maybe it's sounding cold, like, come on, Amy, like, are you heartless? But like, no, like, it is actually really exhausting to care for and care about others all day long.
Yeah. Well, and like emphasis on the all day long part, like that's where the fatigue comes in. I think everybody has a different threshold of that they're able to give that compassion, but whatever that capacity level is, once you get there, you are drained. You are just kind of done. And sometimes it doesn't feel like you should be, especially when you're, in a compassionate field, or especially if you are just required to exercise that. But yeah, yeah.
Well, and I think where, as therapists, like, so much of our work is around empathy, right? Like building our skills around empathy. And they could be skills around empathy for people or situations that we might have a hard time finding empathy for. Maybe it's because we might have differences, or there different values, or whatever, for any sort of reasons. Like, part of our role as therapists is to be empathic no matter what. And that is, again, yes, that's like inherent in a lot of ways, but it's also a skill that means that we are constantly having to filter through our own thoughts, our own judgments, our own biases, our own assumptions, our own feelings, in order to get through to empathy. And that is what's really hard, because it's not only with compassion fatigue or maybe empathy fatigue. It's not like, like, caring about other people is so tough. It's also that, like, and that what that means sometimes is that the needs of others might be more highlighted than your own. And we'll get into that a little bit more throughout our episode. But that, I think, is what also makes it challenging, is that we need to filter through our own needs, our own instincts, all of that stuff, in order to get to empathy sometimes. And that gets draining. All of the math.
Right. Even as you're saying that, it's just, I'm picturing this maze, or like all these obstacles that you have to get through in order to perform that level of compassion or empathy, that you're already working so hard just to get there. And then once you're there, staying there and being present and potentially, if we're talking more compassion, making that person feel better, then all of these things put together is a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. And I was just thinking about, and sometimes finding compassion and finding empathy, again, especially when you are with someone who maybe is doing something that's kind of frustrating or that might be annoying or different than you would do is hard. And I think like in our announcements portion, we referenced reactivity TV. Like that is a time where Catherine and I like really like have to work really hard to get to empathy for some of the for some of the shows that we're commentating on, like in succession, like finding empathy for Siobhan, or when we were doing our Therapist Takes on You, finding empathy for Joe Goldberg, who's a serial killer. And so those are extreme examples, but again, like finding empathy, finding compassion and care and consideration can be a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Even for therapists who are trained to do that.
Right. Yeah. And reactivity TV it's a fun example. I think like we're a little more loose in there. So we're a little more okay with just jumping to like being human and being, just being ourselves. Whereas in the therapy room, or like if we're talking about somebody who's experiencing compassion fatigue, that's just talking with one of their friends, that getting there isn't always, this battle. And yet if you are doing it so much, it still can be just as draining.
Yes, for sure. Well, and you bring up kind of a really important point, which is like, who does it happen to, or like who can get fatigued with compassion? And yes, we're two therapists talking about it. So certainly therapists, healthcare providers, someone providing in a caregiving role. Yes. But also people that like are in relationships. You like, you mentioned like a friend example, like that. Yeah, that counts too. Like whenever you're in a dynamic where you are taking on a caregiving role, but you can be affected by compassion fatigue. So it's not just limited to healthcare providers, though it's like certainly an occupational hazard for those of us who do, literally is. And we did, I do want to reference our burnout episode, which was like, oh my gosh, felt like ages ago. But we did, compassion fatigue is different than burnout, but really can be on the road to burnout. So if you are, as we kind of go through our episode today, if you're really kind of like resonating with compassion fatigue, then I really suggest you go listen to that burnout episode as well. Because we did a 2-parter there, and we gave a lot of info and also steps for burnout recovery, because it's pretty common that compassion fatigue, if not remedied, can lead to pretty significant burnout.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just even to elaborate on how this can happen between friends or between family members. If you're the person that people are calling, people are confiding in, and people are relying on for certain levels of comfort, then you're going to get to a point of compassion fatigue if you're not taking the steps to take care of yourself. And I feel like even just saying that is, just pointing out how okay that is, that to get to that point of, my friends call me all the time and I want to be there for them, but this is really, this has really been difficult for me right now because I have all this stuff going on for me, and I don't have the space for it right now, and I feel terrible. So this can happen in so many different ways and to so many different people.
Yes. I mean, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about like certain like archetypes, like the strong friend, quote unquote, like the one, as you're saying, like that everyone kind of goes to for support, or like that, like everyone knows that they can like rely on or depend on for for compassion, for advice, for just being to vent to, that there's at least one of those in every friend group. And that person's probably pretty tired. Or if you are your family's therapist, and I don't mean like actual, that you're actually
although sometimes
therapist, or that you are a therapist in your family, but like, the one who's like hearing all the stuff going on in the family and like getting pulled on for advice and things like that. Like that happens really commonly. And so you are ripe for compassion fatigue as well. So yeah, it can happen across so many different settings and sets of relationships.
And sometimes it's not even just emotional support that you can have compassion fatigue for. If we're talking families, it can be somebody that's taking care of a family member that's ill, and even that, like you're basically becoming a nurse, you're basically becoming an aide, and that in itself, jumping into this other role where compassion is a requirement it's really difficult.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. Well, and I had said something a few minutes ago, like as I was kind of describing how tiring it can be about in order to like care and be empathic for people, I had said something like, yeah, that probably sounds heartless. And I wanted to kind of come back to that because I think that there is this self-judgment that comes up around feeling fatigued or feeling like, as you were in your example, like, oh, I just like don't have it left to give, like the guilt that can come with that. And so I also wanted to make sure that we hit on that is also such a big piece of, I think, what makes compassion fatigue like a little bit of a perfect storm, because like some of those feelings, whether it's the guilt or the embarrassment or the shame or the shoulds that come up for us when we are feeling fatigued, that might perpetuate us to continue to exert ourselves in a caring role.
Yeah, there's a ton of judgment. And I think like you and I talked about this in a number of other scenarios, but like you start shoulding all over yourself and thinking like, I should be able to handle this. I like this, why can't I just push through and keep going because I should, that there's like this expectation that your threshold is infinite.
Yes. Right. I mean, I think on the professional end, like there is an element of like, I signed up for this. Like I know what I signed up for. I should be able to handle it. Like you said, like I should have this like infinite bandwidth around like care for others, or like on the, more like relationship side of things. Like I care about this person, like, and this is what a good friend does, like that kind of thing. Just kind of having these really unrealistic expectations of ourselves and the roles that we're in, that don't actually, like those expectations, like don't actually set us up for success in our ability to care for others. Like it's such a like vicious cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So why do you think that we get this judgment? Like, where does that come from? Thinking that we're somehow inhuman and can just keep piling on the compassion.
Oh, that's a great question. I want to sit with it for a little bit longer, but one of like my most immediate reactions is also rooted in like something that's like more of the times, which is I think what adds to the feeling that we should be able to do a lot is just our accessibility and just how like on demand we are expected to be, like being always reachable by phone or text or DM or Slack message, or like just the idea that someone is like free potentially or reachable, that they can be available to you. I think that adds to like this pressure. I do also think that we might be surrounded with people that don't have great boundaries, or maybe we ourselves don't have good boundaries. And that makes it really hard to kind of see where the line is between like, oh, this is where I end and you begin kind of thing. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I agree. And I like the part about just thinking that because you can, like, because somebody's available, because we have our phones that are like right there, right at our fingertips. And that means that it just should happen immediately. You get a text, reply to the text. And I also am thinking that there could be this level of comfort that you feel like, or like this level of compassion that you feel like you need and you perhaps deserve, that you end up kind of just projecting onto somebody else. I
know if you're listening to us, you did not just see my face right now, but like, yes, like that. Whoa, that's, I think, a big one. And that in my work with clients, and even as I think about myself in my personal life, that is often like I'm using that as a measuring stick. Like, well, I would really like it if someone did this for me, or like, this is what I'm really needing right now. So like, maybe if I give that to someone else, like I might they might reciprocate or something like that. But I do feel like you're so right that is often kind of an equation that people are kind of like doing the math on is, yeah, how can I, like, what might I want or expect or need, and how do I give that to others? So yeah, you're right. We are projecting. It's like, again, the golden rule that we talked about in a previous episode. Like, let's not do the golden rule anymore. I mean, not totally, but let's it's maybe not the best measurement to treat others how we want to be treated. That sets us up for failure sometimes.
Yeah. So we'll have to weave that into our prevention talk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. Well, speaking of prevention, how do we begin to prevent compassion fatigue? You know, we're saying it's a thing. We're saying that, like, we're all at risk. I mean, there are some of us that might be more at risk than others. I'll also probably add, there are probably like people with certain characteristics that are probably more vulnerable to compassion fatigue as well, like people pleasers and whatnot, that probably like might struggle with this a little bit more. People that I guess we'll get into this, but people that might struggle with boundaries or might have looser boundaries might struggle with compassion fatigue. So like you might have it currently, you might have had it, you might get it. So yeah, how do we prevent it from happening, or maybe to this degree?
What is the vaccine for?
Yes, what is the antidote? What is the vaccine? Yeah. How do we prevent the spread?
Well, I mean, that's a good point too. I think like if you are exercising a certain level of compassion, oftentimes people are going to reciprocate that, and not necessarily, again, because they think that you need it, but because you gave it to them, and they're just trying to keep this mutual, symbiotic relationship going. And then it can create this spread.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. So I guess maybe one way to prevent it, it sounds like, is to be mindful about what your intentions are, but it sounds like what is driving you toward making yourself available for this like compassionate situation. Like, why are you there? Like, whether it's in this conversation, like, especially once you are kind of like reaching that point of feeling a little bit fatigued?
I love that. I love that question. I think that just like in other episodes, one way that we're wanting listeners to think about this is to start thinking about it.
Self-reflect.
Yeah. And should we change the name of this podcast?
I mean, it feels like maybe we've unlocked the key to living a well life, and it's just self-reflection. We did it. We solved wellness. We did it in 40 episodes. Wow. So I don't know if that is the full key, but it feels like a huge piece of the puzzle, the self-awareness piece. Yeah. And I think a question, I know like with therapy, if those of you who are listening are not therapists, a big part of our practice as therapists is that we have something that's called clinical supervision, where a therapist meets with a supervisor and they kind of like talk through their cases, and it's all designed to help the therapist provide the best care possible. And sometimes what comes up is compassion fatigue, or maybe like a therapist sharing like something that she might want, or he or she might want to do in a session, or a way that they might want to intervene. And sometimes a question that I ask is, who is that for? Is that for you, or is that for the client? And I feel like that same question is useful here, just thinking back to what you had said, Catherine, about the projection, that like in asking yourself, like, why am I showing up to be in this role of caregiver right now? Again, like thinking, who is this actually for? Is this for me to feel like I'm a good friend, or feel like I should, or feel like this is just how I think they might need me, or this is what I might want them to do? Like, those aren't a good enough answer, I don't think, to be overextending yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great point. And I mean, I like that you just brought up the position of a supervisor and a supervisee. And I think outside of therapy, having somebody to offload some of that compassion to, sort of like explain what it is that you are going through, explain what it is that you like, what's tiring you out, whether that is a different friend than the ones that are confiding in you, or somebody else that, or even whether it could be journaling, that you just taking it out of you and putting it somewhere else can be a great help.
Right. And I like that, because it does allow for greater perspective. It allows you to slow down. I think whether you are, again, like in a caring profession, if you're a professional helper, or if this is a role that you take on in your life, a lot of it ends up being kind of habit, being instinctual, just being like, this is just how I roll, that like you might not have the opportunity to really have the space to be reflective, or to, as you're saying, kind of offload some of this stuff. And yeah, journaling is such a great a great way to do that. Having you're another sympathetic, compassionate friend, a therapist, like other ways that you can kind of get some space between you and the compassion that you're so ready to kind of exert.
Mm-hmm. And then like some actual space, taking some time off if it's your place of work where you're experiencing this compassion fatigue, or scheduling time away from these particular people that quote unquote need you right now, that even that relief that you can get from some time away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think speaking of kind of like space and time away, another great way to prevent compassion fatigue is through having really healthy boundaries. And this is something, again, go back and listen to our boundaries episodes. And that's another two-parter, because we kind of talk about why it's difficult to set a boundary. Boundaries get kind of a bad rap, right? That they're kind of seen as something that kind of puts up a wall between you and other people. And we kind of broke that down and said, no, boundaries are really a bridge that allow you and another person to really connect in a way that feels comfortable to you both. And so boundaries in the sense of compassion fatigue are really, really important, that you are making sure that your needs are met first and foremost. Having boundaries with yourself, boundaries with others are really helpful. And I think people that might be more affected by compassion fatigue tend to feel really guilty for having boundaries, or for saying no, or maybe putting that space or that distance between, a friend reached out to you and is like, I need to talk, and you maybe taking a little bit of time before responding. Like, that can probably feel bad. And that might bring up some guilt and that's something I definitely have struggled with. But I did hear something that was very helpful for me as a different way to think about it, a reframe, from Brene Brown. And she had shared this quote: "The most compassionate people have the best boundaries." And I thought that was so powerful. And I heard it in a training, actually, like, speaking of clinical supervision, it was a clinical supervision training. And it lit up the room. Like, the room was so pissed off with this quote. And here it's a room of people that, again, care for people for a living, probably experience compassion fatigue regularly. And they could not wrap their brains around, like, how can this be? How can you be both compassionate and have boundaries? Like, how does that work? And truly, like, the only way that we can be able to care properly and well for others is when we are well cared for ourselves. And boundaries are the avenue to do that.
It's just completely true that when we have better boundaries as therapists, that we're better therapists. And that boundary doesn't necessarily mean like our scheduled time off, although that totally has to do with it, but also could mean the time that we are working, what times, when we're willing to schedule clients. And those things are very purposeful, because we know when we're able to be our best selves, like, right? And being able to actually do that, and then also being able to recognize when you're not doing that. Like, I know that if I schedule a client in a time that I don't normally offer, then something is a little off, and maybe I'm overextending myself, and then I tend to just keep doing it when it starts happening. So knowing those signals that tell you, like, hey, you better check your boundaries, or else that compassion fatigue is going to set in. And then, if that compassion fatigue sets in, you better bet that burnout's going to come soon after. Mm. So yeah, you're so right.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. So we're saying self-reflection and boundaries are two huge steps that you can take to preventing compassion fatigue. But what happens when you are already kind of in it, that you're already noticing, like, the signs and the symptoms, and that you are kind of like feeling like it's like you're losing your patience, you're kind of feeling like it's harder to be empathic, you're feeling more kind of like stretched thin and kind of emotionally disconnected. Like, what do you do?
Well, as difficult as it can be in those circumstances, it's that much more necessary to be assertive and be honest with, obviously, yourself, but then the people that are in your life that are playing into this, or like that are I don't want to say causing it, because you're the one that's, in the driver's seat here, but the people that are contributing to it. And so I'd kind of suggest some similar statements to those that we talked about in our people pleasing episode. Something like, I'd really love to help you with this, and I need some time to charge my batteries before I can fully be there for you. So I can't talk about this right now. Or I want to give you my undivided attention because that's what you deserve. And before I can do that, I need to take time for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So just being able to put up that essentially like a stop sign, but of course in this kind and generous way, because you're a compassionate person and you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So there's a nice way to sugarcoat it.
Yeah. And I mean, and I can attest, like, that works. Like and that's something I've been really trying a lot. Like a really common occurrence is that I will be like driving home from work, for example, and I'm drained and exhausted and I've had like a very long day and I'm tired. Like my patience is thin and I need quiet. Like I don't want to hear anybody talk. I don't want to use my brain. Like all of those things that for me are signals like my compassion fatigue is in. And then I'll walk in and my husband will be like eager and excited to tell me about something that he's working on, and whether that's something he's excited and working on personally or something that he's working on in support of Revive and our business. Like for a long time, I would just like let him like talk. I would half pay attention. He'd ask me about it. I would like try to fake an answer, or I would just like be annoyed and like say something like shitty, like because I had no patience, like I don't really care about this or whatever. And that didn't feel good. And so what I've been doing, because I'm a compassionate person and I care about this relationship, is I've said, like, I can see like how excited you are to tell me about this, or like, I know how hard you've been working on this. Like, I am so tired. My brain feels so fried. I want to give you the time and space that like you deserve. So, but I just, that can't be right now. Like I need to recharge my brain for a second before I like listen. I want to be able to listen, like I value what you're saying, like that kind of stuff. And that's helped so much. And this is, again, with a partner who is not as, and this is with a partner that like runs more logic-based and reason-based than me, that I like tend to run high on emotions. And he's, and so even that, like he gets that, even though like he doesn't like connect as like deeply or as passionately to emotions as I might. And so that's been so helpful in my relationship with my husband. I've used that with my parents, like family members, things like that. So great.
Well, and I think I love that you are, I mean, we just talked about how a part of being compassionate is that you're stepping outside of yourself to help somebody else. And what you're doing in your way to manage it is you're still stepping outside of yourself in terms of how can I frame this in a way that the person receiving it, who I know thinks differently than I do, will get it. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't totally end.
Right. Still using a little bit of empathy there. And I think in so many other episodes when we've talked about relationships and communication, like it does take practice to get to a place where I'm like, okay, I need to like regulate myself enough to deliver this message in like a compassionate way or an empathic way in order for me to get what I need, which is space and time. This is such a random example as well, but I'm thinking about a Sex and the City episode, which I tend to reference a lot on this podcast.
You do. Yeah.
Wow. Who knew I was had so many deep Sex and the City memories, but I'm thinking about an episode where Carrie and Aiden had moved in together. And when she would come home, he would say like, hey, what's going on? What's happening? Where you been? Who you been with? All that stuff. and she was getting so annoyed, and they ended up like having an argument about it. So they put up like a curtain in their apartment. And so she was like, I'm just going to go to my space, and I need you to be quiet and whatever. And I'm just going to go behind here and be left alone. And she just having the little bit of space, it was a sheer curtain. It took like a few seconds for her to then go out and say like, hey, what are you up to? What are you doing? And I guess I was thinking about that because sometimes for me, and I don't know if you've had this experience, but sometimes just asserting myself or advocating for myself, or even just having a little bit of space for me, or like that time that's like me asserting myself or advocating for myself, also means I've checked in with myself. That kind of diminishes the window of time I actually need to recharge.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that is so true. What is that about? Why does that happen?
I don't know, but it's weird.
It's like this release.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it is like a catharsis in some way.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. But all of your Sex and the City references are, I mean, I can picture them right away. So they're all spot on.
Well,
keep them coming.
Any other thoughts around managing it? I know this assertiveness one is huge.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Assertiveness and advocating. Do you have any?
I guess I would add, and maybe this isn't like a quick recovery strategy, but if compassion fatigue is something that you are experiencing frequently, like, or regularly, that if you are not talking about it with a therapist, or maybe you are in therapy and this isn't really coming up, I would suggest bringing it to a therapist and really looking at the root, like looking at what is causing this tendency for you to kind of continue to overextend yourself to the point of compassion fatigue. So I would try to really because for each of us, that's really unique and different. Like we talked about, like, of course, ways to prevent it. And we talked about, some, as I refer to them, like characteristics, personality traits, but also like a lot of what compassion fatigue might stem from is something that we might have learned, or something that is kind of part of a bigger thing that we want to tackle in therapy in terms of our self-esteem, our self-concept, insecurity, perfectionism, family trauma. I mean, it could go from anywhere. And so the best way to prevent it, like in the long run, is to treat the root cause. And so it's not as quick and speedy as asserting yourself. And again, it will have a lasting long-term impact.
That's a great point. It could be so much deeper.
Okay, so we've covered a lot as it relates to compassion fatigue. And so if you are like, if that fatigue is setting in, make sure you are, again, always leaning on that self-reflection, thinking about your boundaries. Do check out our episodes around boundaries, around burnout as well, so that you can... And people pleasing. Yes. Those could be really great resources to help you manage this fatigue a little bit better.
Definitely check those out. And of course, make sure you're engaging in self-care. And we always ask each other about self-care. And that's what we're going to do now, because we always end with that. So, Amy, what is on your self-care menu today?
Wait, I wanted to ask you first.
Okay.
Catherine, what's on your self-care menu today?
It's actually not on the menu today, but it has been this week. Just going to be honest. So I'm obviously this time of year, it's May now. It's lovely out at night and lighter out. And I've been taking after dinner walks with my husband, and it's been so nice. One, because I love to get outside and it's just more time to get outside. And also being pregnant, I like to just go for walks after I eat, which has been very nice and helpful with my digestion. So kind of killing two birds with one stone. Well, actually, maybe three, because then it's more time spent with my husband. And he doesn't even entirely want to necessarily go for the walk, but he's going for me, maybe because I'm pregnant. I don't know. Either way, he's going and it's great.
That's nice. That sounds so nice. Yeah, it is like we have entered, time of recording, it's mid-May. We have entered peak Connecticut spring. This is the week that like Connecticut shines, literally.
It's wonderful. Yeah. So that is on my self-care menu this week. Like I said, I'm not doing it tonight. That's only because I'm going to get some dinner with friends and I don't know when I'm going to be back. but yeah, what's on your menu?
Well, kind of related to what you were saying. I literally just got back from Miami and the weather was beautiful there too. Like we are approaching like not peak Miami weather where it gets like really hot and like hard to be outside, but we were not there. When I was there this past week, it was warm, but manageable. And so I was able to get a lot of walks in and like very consistently. And so now I like landed back. We're in this like perfect, beautiful Connecticut weather. We're going to have that at least through the weekend, which is so exciting. And so I plan to continue my walks and like spending time outside as much as possible. Like I ate lunch outside today on my stoop. And so that was nice. And also my husband and I, for our Friday night date night, are eating at a restaurant that has outdoor seating because this Friday is going to be 80 degrees. So I'm really excited about that too. So it's kind of a mix of all things, like the weather, moving my body, my like Friday night date night with my husband. It's a mix of everything.
This time of year just brings on so many yummy things.
It really does. Well, and it's so interesting because like in therapy, as therapists, like this is where we see like a lot of cancellations because like the sun comes out and people are like, I feel great. Everything is great. And I get that because like, when the sun is shining, it's like, it makes everything feel so much better.
Right. And then the sun consistently shines. And then we realize like, oh, wait, I still have a lot of things I need to work.
Yeah. A PSA, if you're listening, to keep your therapy appointments because there will be a cloudy day coming soon.
Sorry to burst your bubble.
But I'm excited for like a new season of like a switch up in self-care. And I know in our last episode, you kind of talked about that a little bit and like just in being pregnant, like your self-care has kind of had to shift and change. And we were kind of talking about that. Like it's time we have to reassess self-care based on our needs. And we can also reassess self-care based on the season. Like spring self-care looks totally different than winter self-care. So if you're listening, go spice up your self-care menu with some spring-related activities.
Yeah. Winter self-care is like, let me just cozy up and curl up in a little ball. And spring and summer self-care is like, I'm bursting at the seams. Let me get out and go.
Yes. Yeah, I know. Yes, I'm so excited for all the things. So we always love to hear what's on your self-care menu as well. So keep us posted on that. On Revive's Instagram, I do a weekly self-care check-in where I share a self-care tip and also always ask what's on your menu. So keep us posted. Keep them coming. We love the ideas and suggestions for ourselves too. So self-care doesn't become stale for us either. And with that being said, thank you for following along with us here on our podcast. For giving us a follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, for the reviews, for sharing episodes with friends or family. Thank you so much. Also, please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Revive Center for Wellness, where you can grab our therapist takes on reality TV. And you can also get access to so much other great content, like learning more about our providers, nutrition content, just overall wellness tips. Definitely want to check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Instagram at ReviveCFW. You can follow Catherine at Catherine Van Eyck, me at Amy Albero LCSW. And you can check out our website, revivecfw.com, or send us an email to wishingyouwell@revivecfw.com. Thank you again. And until next time, we are wishing you well.